What is going on, everyone? Thank you for tuning in to my talk, which is the variable is what you make of it. And by that, x could be equals to 1, which means it's normally an integer, but there's no reason you can't redeclare that into a string because you control the universe around it. There is no spoon to bend because you can bend reality. X doesn't have to be a programming thing. It could be a negative experience in your life, but you look at all the positive things that came out of it and willed that negative into being a positive, which is one of the best things you can do for your mental health. And yes, this talk's gonna get both into technical and mental things because it's all the advice I wish I had a decade ago. So with that being said, let's get over into the agenda because I know I'm gonna lose some people at some point. So hopefully knowing these things come next keeps you interested in the talk. So starting off, I'm going to do the intro, who am I? I'm going to put a different spin on it and talk about my journey instead of all the places I've worked because places I worked aren't really that interesting. Then we're going to get into the technical tips about keeping it simple, the importance of recon, and how to ask questions, which yes, I put under a technical thing because it's something you should be doing like all the time, right? After that, we're going to go into keeping a positive mindset by stopping the use of words like fail and just what a learning curve is, because I find that to be very important. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up with the reason behind the title of this talk, which is life is what you make of it, how to not do the bare minimum and go beyond. So who am I? Well, currently, I'm a senior lab architect at Hack the Box, which I find to be a funny title because no one really knows what that title means until you look at it in depth. If you abbreviate it, it's SLA, Service Level Agreement, which generally means Quality Assurance, QA, right? And that's mostly my job, right? I just go between all the departments of Hack the Box and make sure that people are up to like my standards or try to help them, right? A lot of people don't like QA roles. It's not a coveted job title because generally they don't go beyond the bare minimum and just follow a playbook. But me, I generally try to raise the bar wherever I go. So I interact with the community team, which I'm talking to you now, guys. And then I go over to the content team and help build machines. I work on the pro labs occasionally. I do some infrastructure things. Sometimes I do development, add features, or fix bad things on the site. I just wear many hats because I'm in QA. I can do what I want, right? Primarily, I'm self-taught and love jumping between a bunch of topics. I have ADHD if you can't tell. So I find it kind of funny that I'm self-taught, but also giving a talk for a university because I never went to college. I wish I did. I just didn't because I was working right away and didn't really have the time. But college is one of those things that I'm very envious of because of all the socialization. I don't mean all the partying in colleges. I mean all the collegiate events, right? For instance, the Uni CTF that you're doing right now, that's only available to college students, so that's awesome. There's also like the National Cyber League NCL Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition, CCDC, the Seesaw, the US Cyber Team. There's a bunch over in Europe that I don't know. There's so many collegiate cyber events for kids. It's just amazing now, right? The community has changed so much since like 2017 when Hack the Box started. And it's a funny story because when Hack the Box started, we didn't have a concept of retired videos or retired machines, which meant you can't talk about any machine ever. There was no talking about machines. It was all like the try-harder mentality. Eventually, they started retiring machines. I started doing YouTube videos and became a moderator at the site. And when I became a moderator, I did what everyone does when they first do it, and that's search your name in the private chat and see what people said about you when they didn't think you could read it, right? And it was kind of funny. There was a debate, like the very first mention of IppSec in the Hack the Box Slack is about if videos are a good thing for the community or whatnot. Obviously, I think 7 years later, we know they are. It's just amazing how much the community has changed, and I can't wait to see what the community does and grows in the next 5 years. If you don't know about me and you're confused about everything I've said, check out IppSec.rocks. It's where I index all my videos. I want to say I have over 300 hours of content that you can easily search through IppSec.rocks. There's a My Contributions link on that page that I try to put everything that I've contributed back to the community, including things I've made or interviews I've done, things like that. Previous to Hack the Box, I was a sysadmin, security, purple teamer, developer. It's an interesting story, I guess, because my very first place I applied to as a kid was a grocery store, Weiss, and I got denied. And then I went to Funkerland, which is a video game retailer, I guess kind of like Best Buy, and I got denied. Eventually, I was an umpire for a local baseball league because they didn't turn anyone down. But my high school teacher, who also taught at colleges, sent my resume into companies that asked for good college students because I did some coding on the side with Planet Source Code that is like a precursor to GitHub. So it was just an open source code sharing place, and I had a blog. The company hired me. So I had a nice job right out of high school. They were thinking I was a college student. I kind of social engineered my way into that one. After 7 to 8 years, I got laid off from that company. I know, crazy. IppSec getting laid off from a job. And I thought it was a very bad thing at the time. Like, I thought the world was crumbling down. But looking back at that experience, it's probably one of the best things that happened to me because I got a new job. And that new job, they did a lot of things differently. Not necessarily better or worse, just differently, and that let me learn so much, and it changed my perspective a lot switching jobs. I got that new job not because of my technical merit, it was because I was playing StarCraft with a lot of friends. I did shoutcasting back in the day, and they're like, "You're a cool person, our company needs a sysadmin, I hear you do sysadmin-y things, do you want a job?" I was like, "Yeah, I do," and that was that. I mentioned the shoutcasting thing because I actually grew up with a speech impediment called rhoticism, and I had a stutter, right? But shoutcasting, if you don't know, is like John Madden is to football as a shoutcaster is to video games. They just like commentate pro gamers playing video games, which I know is crazy if you don't know anything about that scene. Like, you can make money playing video games? What? But yeah, I did shoutcasting mainly to improve my speech because a lot of people said I couldn't talk and I wanted to prove them wrong. So I did that for a long time. That's also partly why I do the videos, to help keep improving my speech, because when I get into security, it took so much time I couldn't play StarCraft anymore. Eventually, that company sold to another company. It became not a great place to work. I followed a friend there to a different company, which then I quit during COVID because COVID changed a lot of things and I wanted full remote work, which is when I joined Hack the Box, right? So that is like my life in a nutshell. And I say all that because I put a lot of prioritization on my socialization, not my technical abilities, because that's what's helped me the most, right? And that is just my opinion. There's going to be a lot of opinions in this talk. I'm not saying all my opinions are the correct ones. They're probably wrong. The answer is probably somewhere between my opinion and your opinion, so take what resonates with you ahead and just use this as food for thought, I guess, right? So my first opinion that I'll shout from a rooftop is hacking is an art and not a science. By that, I mean hacking really benefits from a little bit of human intuition. If it was a problem that can be solved programmatically easily, then companies like Tenable with Nessus or Rapid7 with Nextpose, before Nessus there was Retina, security scanners have been around forever. They would have solved this problem. It's not an easy problem to solve because of that human intuition. And I find it kind of funny because whenever someone starts out in the field, they start off with a bad flowchart. Because it goes very much like a program would do, right? They all just run all these tools and say, I'm going to run Nmap. I see it has a web server, so I'm going to run Nikto, GoBuster, Pharaohbuster, because those do web servery things. Then I see a login page. I'm going to run SQL map to see if it's SQL injectable. I don't know what this variable is, so I'm going to run TPL map because I don't know what this program does, but I had good results in the past, or I saw someone run it once upon a time, so I'm just going to always add this into my workflow. Then I'm going to run Burp Suite scanners, SQL injection payloads, and eventually you have this giant haystack, and there's this very small needle that you're looking for that is the vulnerability. But you put so much information around it, you've obscured it, right? I don't like these tool-based flowcharts. If I see this, I run all these things. Instead, I follow a much more question-based thing, right? It's kind of more of a social concept. What ports are open? What applications are these? I don't say the ports tied to Nmap because you may not always use Nmap to find the port. Sometimes you just use netstat, right, if you're on the box. Does this cookie name mean anything? Because often the cookie will link what framework it is, what language it is. PHP loves PHP session ID. Java loves J session ID. So you can identify the languages. Sometimes fields just look injectable. Your spidey sense goes off. I'm not saying don't run tools, but whenever I run a tool, I think like, will a tool answer this question? Because every time you ask a question, the haystack is so small, you know what you're looking for. And since the haystack's small, the needle stands out more. So you get the small haystack, look for the needle, don't see it, ask another question, build upon that, look for the needle, don't see it, and just keep that pattern going, right? So keep it simple. Let's say we have RCE on a server, right? A lot of people may just go straight into throwing a reverse shell. And this is just a simple thing that gets you a command line access to a Linux server remotely, right? But there's a lot of ways this can fail. And when something fails, you don't know why it failed. You can ask, like any question you ask the server, it's going to return a Boolean, yes or no back to you, right? So you're going to ask, hey, send me this shell. And it's going to respond no. You don't know what question it responded no to. You may not be in Bash. It may not be a Linux box. It could be BSD, Solaris, Windows, whatever. Maybe the server didn't understand all those special redirection characters like that greater than ampersand thing. Maybe port 9001 was blocked. Maybe the server didn't block you. Maybe the network did. Maybe AV or EDR blocked access to Bash. There's 100 ways this command can fail, and all you know is the command failed, not why, right? So if you keep it simple, then you can extract information out of that, right? If you didn't do the reverse shell first and just did ping attacker.com, ICMP is going to be allowed to the firewall more often than TCP, so maybe you get a response there. If not, ping generally takes a while to run, so maybe the request takes longer. If for some reason both of those were no, you may still get a DNS request if the box tried to resolve attacker.com to you, right? So there's two different ways you're trying to traverse the firewall. ICMP works most of the time. DNS works almost always. If you don't have RCE, you can just test it off with like an echo test. And if you don't see the word echo in the response, but you see the word test, chances are it processed that. Or you can just go the sleep route and do a time-based and see if the page takes long to respond, right? There's a lot of ways you can keep it simple. So when it fails, you know why it failed, right? Either you're trying to get it so it fails, and you know it failed because it's not vulnerable, not it failed because something blocked you, right? I find that to be very important. So keeping along this mindset, ask simple questions, right? Let's say we have a server-side template injection, which is looks like a complicated exploit if you're not familiar with this, but you can notice it's doing this thing. I want to say this is the Ginger 2 template. Essentially, it's an attack in rendering engines, right? Python web developers have this web page that they create in HTML, and then they put these two brackets around it to put variables from the programming language into the page so the user gets dynamic content, right? And this is a valid template, right? It's got two squigglies here, two squigglies here. There's no mismatch, so the templating language is going to process it. It fails, it just returns nothing, right? It doesn't error out, it returns nothing, which makes it hard to identify. If this failed, you just get a blank spot where it failed, versus if you just sent one squiggly bracket, you may cause an error in the whole templating language itself and get nothing back from the page, like error 500, right? So at this point, you may be asking, well, if I keep it this simple and just ask questions one character at a time, it's going to take forever, right? But that's why fuzzing exists. So I like using tools like ffuf, Fuzz Faster You Fool, or wfuzz, which is a Python version of this. Search.request, this is just a HTTP request. I put fuzz in capital letters where I want to send the input to the web page. Special characters.text, this is just a text file that contains all the special characters, right? And then MC all, this is going to be match code all. By default, ffuf doesn't match all status codes, and I want it to match it all, so I see every result. So what you get is us sending the % to the web server and then the response back. Us sending the asterisk to the web server and the response back, right? So we can ask the server many questions really quick and glance and see the answers, right? If you want to know more about this, check out the Academy course, or just go to IppSec.rocks and type ffuf. So let's play a game. Guess that vulnerability from ffuf output, right? Looking at this, you see two things stick out. There's the size 61 at two places. This one's kind of a false positive. The ampersand's a weird character when it comes to this because ffuf, if you don't tell it to, doesn't URL encode anything, and the ampersand's used as a delimiter for variables, so oftentimes the web server just ignores it. The key one is the single quote. In this case, it's an SQL injection. It's not always going to be an SQL injection. It goes back to creating an uneven number of quotes, squiggly brackets, whatever. But more often than not, it's going to be more common than not. The key thing here is I'd ask the server, what happens if I send you a single quote? And the server is like, error. And you're like, okay, I'm going to experiment on this more, right? So that was fun. Let's do it again. This one changes quite a bit. The web server on this hand is echoing and has a different size than most things. And the reason for that is actually a protection in place. If you don't filter out these characters, the greater than and less than sign, then it's probably going to be vulnerable to cross-site scripting because the attacker can put HTML characters on the page. So how it works under the hood is the web server translates this into, I think, an ampersand GT semicolon for greater than. And then whenever the web browser displays it, it displays it as a greater than sign, but doesn't treat it as HTML, so it's not vulnerable to cross-site scripting. The key thing here, though, is the error 500 codes when it sees squiggly brackets, and that tells me I should go into server-side template injection and look at it more, right? But it's not all about fuzzing. Also, reading between the lines is very important. So here we have a bunch of nmap output. The key things here, probably I would point out the Nginx server header, and then also a JSession ID. When you see Nginx and Tomcat, chances are there's going to be some type of URL parsing bugs. You can look at the orange side presentations, or you can just go to IppSec.rocks, type in Nginx Tomcat or Apache Tomcat, and find some relevant videos, right? So this is reading between the lines. Nmap's not telling us there's a vulnerability, but because we can combine two things, we know we probably should look for a vulnerability. And doesn't mean there isn't one, just means this is the path we should go down, right? We read between those two lines and saw something. Next one. This is a bit more tricky that I think most people would miss. The thing that stands right out is this workzug server header, which isn't a great thing. It's just a Python web server, but that's not what I want to point out here. What I want to point out here is the SSH banner. You notice something odd here in this Python? Whoops. The SSH banner says it's Ubuntu Bionic, which is an old version of Ubuntu. Generally, it has, I think, Python 3.6, and we have a Python 3.10 banner here. Most of the time, developers don't install a different version of Python than what comes with the operating system, because that just creates a bunch of mess. So here, there's probably either network address translation, NAT into play, or it's running Docker, right? And if it's a Ubuntu box itself, chances are it's going to be running some type of virtualization technology like Docker. And in this sense, knowing Docker is handy to us because Docker is a very stripped down OS. So when we try RCE things, chances are things like ping and stuff won't be on the box. So we know not to try that, or if it fails, it may have failed because ping didn't exist, which in most cases is unique, but not in Docker, right? So this is the little bit of information we can extract from banners that happens if you read between the lines. The final one, it's so easy, you could probably search anything on it, so we're not going to play a game. If you ever get an error page that doesn't say Apache or white label error page is a common string, but if you just Google this, it tells you it's the Spring Boot to server-side template injection. It's Java, so there's the log4j thing that just came out. There's a bunch of Tomcat type exploits you could try. You could try that URL parsing bug. There's just a lot of things you can try. Maybe Java deserialization, just different attack paths that open up once you know what the framework is. And at this point, you're probably saying, wow, this is a lot of information. How do you learn all of this stuff? Because we're not really taught it. And the reason why I learned this is because I understand the importance of asking questions. I love questions. I ask myself questions. I ask other people questions. I ask my dog questions. I ask my computer questions. I ask my drinks questions. Like, I always question everything, which sometimes is annoying, but as a way to keep them motivated and stop banging their head against the wall. The next important thing you can do is ask questions when you complete something. So both you and your friend completed a box, ask them how they completed it, see how they did it, see if they did anything better than you, build up your framework that way. And then finally, I always like asking myself questions. So if I did something and there was a step I didn't like, I'm like, okay, let's remove that step. Maybe I guessed completely here. Was there anything I missed on this box now that I have root that I could have done in order to find this answer differently, right? Also, questions will help you make friends and build relationships that set you up for success later. But asking questions is not easy. There's a art to asking questions. I find a lot of people fall into the game of tag quite often when they ask a question. I always hate when I see a message that just says, hey, may I ask a question? You already did, right? It's better to bait them into a question by explaining where you're at and how hard you've tried. If you just come to me, say, hey, I'm having trouble with this UniCTF challenge, I'm going to be like, well, I don't know how to help you, and just move on with my life, right? But if you go and explain what challenge you're having, the things you've tried, by just explaining it to yourself, chances are you realize what you missed and may answer the question yourself, or you may bait the person into answering the question for you. An example question I have is, hey, I'm doing this challenge. I've proven cross-site scripting with HTML tags, but I'm having trouble bypassing a filter that I believe is blocking IP addresses because of blank, right? And the answer here is URL encoding the IP address. By like an IP address, it could be 127.0.0.1, and there's nothing that prevents you from using 0x7f, which is 127.0.0.0.01. So 127.0.0.1 in hex, and it resolves. If you don't believe me, go open up a command prompt, type ping 0x7f000001, and you'll be amazed that it pings localhost, right? I like this question because it actually baited me into Hack the Box. This is from the Holiday Machine. Someone asked me this question. I was like, wow, that was very creative. Somehow I knew the answer. And I was like, where'd you like run into this? I want to do more of this. And that was Hack the Box. So that's what got me on the platform. So the question not only helped the person asking it, but helped me, because if they didn't ask it, I may not be on Hack the Box and I may be at a completely different point in life right now, right? So questions help everyone. Once you ask a lot of questions, you also have to keep a positive mindset. A lot of people may ignore you. You can't take that as a negative. Just move on with your life. Also, this is going to be a hard field. It requires a lot of time. And there's always this unrealistic jack of all trades expectation set of you, right? Because you're the attacker. The defender, they get to build the playing field. They build it how they want. They research the technologies they put in place. They know the frameworks. You may not know Django, Flask, Spring Boot, whatever, but you have a good enough foundation because you spent so much time learning this that all those frameworks boil down to HTTP. You can intercept the packets in Burp Suite and just turn the battlefield into one unifications. If you look at the blue team field, all the certifications are vendor-based, and I think that makes it a bit easier because there's another motivation for you getting certified that most people don't think about. So if you think of blue team certifications, Microsoft, Red Hat, Cisco, Juniper, like all the vendors produce these things, right? And if I'm a CCNA, which is a relatively entry-level Cisco certification, I'm not going to recommend company buy Juniper equipment. And if I get hired for a CCNA, a networking position, the company's not going to be like, great, you're a CCNA, we hired you. Here's a bunch of Juniper equipment. Good luck. I hope you can understand it. That just doesn't happen. Well, it probably does, but it shouldn't happen, right? So when you're a blue team, the certifications convert you into like a mini advertisement for that company, right? In the offensive security space, we don't really have that. Like SANS, offensive security, Hack the Box, all of us, like we teach techniques. We're not really a vendor-based solution, right? And that creates a lot of learning curves, which can be demotivating. Essentially, the learning curve, think of riding a bike. They pass and then ask them again, they're going to say, what took me so long, right? Generally, that means there's a learning curve. You change your mindset and then this field becomes easy. And I think the mindset that you have to change is learning how to troubleshoot things properly and thinking on a question-based thing and not a tool-based thing. I think those two things will help you get into this field. The other reason why it's hard to keep a positive mindset other than learning is security wins on others' failures. So if you ask anyone that's in the field, they generally do the same thing over and over again. Why do people click on these phishing emails? Why don't people update? No one checks these alerts. It's so easy to fall into those negative things instead of thinking about positives. And when you keep thinking about negatives, your brain's going to lead to negative things more often than not. And things that you used to think as positive experiences, since you've like hardwired your brain to treat more things as negative, you'll lead into negative things and become a negative person over time, which just is not good. So the easiest way to not become a negative person is eliminating the word fail from your vocabulary. You did not fail. Try to look at the positives, right? You're taking a test, you didn't get the outcome you want. Well, you learned what you didn't know, which is a very hard thing to learn. If you're on a job, say a company hired you to hack them, and they stopped you, highlight how they stopped you. Highlight all their defenses. A company, when they get hire for a pen test, they want to hear how good they are. They don't want to hear how bad they are. So you're not going to upset them by handing them a report that says all these blinking boxes, things that you installed and configured correctly, did stop the attack, right? So they're going to love that report. In hindsight, you're going to remember all the things that stopped you. So when you go to a conference and socialize, you can talk about those defenses and find ways around them to better yourself, right? There's always positive experiences, even though if on the cover, it's a negative thing. So try to take positives away from every experience. And the easiest way to do that is by stopping doing the bare minimum. If you only do what is asked, well, chances are it's not what you exactly wanted, right? So the easiest way to do more than the bare minimum is redefine done. So for instance, when I was a sysadmin, I used to do a lot of server hardening, and I thought it was one of the silliest things to do to harden up to a certain standard because there are a lot of things I just didn't understand, right? Or I didn't find value in it. For instance, in hindsight, one of the silliest things is I hated hardening like php.ini files to block system commands from executing because the web application doesn't use system. So why should I worry about blocking that, right? Well, attackers can put that in, and that's good, right? Another one is like Windows has this FIPS encryption group policy that may do nothing, but it actually stopped one of my C2 tests because I used RC4 encryption, and FIPS doesn't allow RC4, or maybe it was XOR. It was one of the basic levels of encryption. I was like, wow, that FIPS standard actually blocked a lot of C2s. Who knew, right? Going beyond, no one will ever complain, and you do learn things, and it also helps convert those negatives into positives. If you're in a CTF, don't stop at the flags. Go beyond root, as me and OXDF say, right? The flags are what the machine creator forced you to do. You did it because you kind of want to do it. You may have not want to do all the things the machine creator has said, but once you root the machine, it's all you, right? You can decide what you want to do. You want to go and focus on web development. You can see how they coded the web application or coded whatever it was. You want to go into how to do secure coding? Well, you're already looking at the code. Want to go into detection? You can put like audit D on the box and look at the logs and see what alerts you created. You can literally do anything. Once you get the flag, it's only about 50%. And lastly, when you go beyond, you often socialize and learn from others, right? So practice makes perfect. The key to success is repetition. The results are not going to be quick in this field. You can't hack time. I always say whenever you have a long-running recon task, make sure you run it first, because if you're on the very last hour and you're like, man, I didn't run SQL for GoBuster, you'll get the result, and then it's going to be over, and you're going to hate life, right? Always start the recon tasks up front because you can't hack time. Same with when you try to get results. If you just say, I'm going to be a hacker, I'm going to study really hard for 2 days, chances are you're not going to see results in 3 days, right? Just know you get results over time, and also write down every win. This is going to help you understand with repetition that good things will come. Also, the mind works in mysterious ways, right? You can't just surgically remove one memory from a person, because the brain, as we understand, is this complex thing of neurons with a bunch of things going around it, right? If you just do something one time, you create one neuron to one memory, and then we do things multiple ways, you're creating more passageways there. And that just helps with memory retention because you're strengthening that memory, right? There's a bigger network of neurons that know how to get there. That's also why if you focus on negative things or think negatively a lot of ways, it's easier to hardwire your brain to think negative. And why I think like a lot of people are in like this self-defense mode because everyone's been so scared of COVID for the last 2 or 3 years that they've just been thinking negatively for so long, their brain's hardwired to thinking negative because they've strengthened those neurons, not thinking about positive things. So the easiest way to rewire your brain to think positively is slow down, write down whenever you have a positive experience, because you're creating a journal of positivity. Also, you're spending more time on that, so you're strengthening the relation there. Also, socializing is going to help you a lot. Not only help you find jobs, but help you learn. So it's almost off my time. Let's get into holiday CTFs because, well, you've got a group here doing the uni CTF. So let's take that group and do other things. If you want to do small programming challenges, the Advent of Code is great. If you want to do a wide range of hacking puzzles, Hackvent is another good one. I say puzzles because Hackvent is more like challenge-based, or not challenge, puzzle-based. It's not exactly going to be realistic, but that doesn't mean it's not good. I enjoy that event. Then, last but not least, my favorite, KringleCon, which used to be called the Sans Holiday Hack Challenge. If you look at my YouTube channel, Holiday Hack Challenge is the first videos I have ever done. It's a really great event for both red and blue teams, so definitely check it out. All of these are free, so no reason not to. That's it for my time. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Take care, and I will see you all next time.